I think I've got this great case. So I go back to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm like, hey, remember me? I was the guy you said don't talk to Ricardo. Well, I went and talked to him anyway. Look what I've got. They lost their shit. They literally told me they were going to arrest me and indict me because I'm interfering with their investigation.
They did not give a shit about your homicide,
they told me to get the F out of their building and never come back. I remember the attorney's name to this day. I won't say who she is. She actually went on to have a very illustrious career in the U.S. Attorney's Office. But yeah, they straight up threatened to arrest me if I had anything to do with this case from this point forward because they're targeting Chapo. And ultimately, they're going to get Chapo. And I was screwing that up.
So did anything you do help them with their case at all?
Oh, yeah. We created so much strife. This nobody of a detective running around Gilbert was creating such a damn stir that it threw the whole cartel out of whack.
This sounds really familiar.
Yeah, like I said, don't ever underestimate somebody who's very tenacious and has some time on their hands. I am now further ordered by the U.S. Attorney's Office that, hey, remember we told you we will arrest you? If you document this and cause it to be a public report, we will also indict you. So we get in this weird catch-22 where we have solved Jan Houdek's homicide.
There's no one to prosecute.
There's no one to prosecute, and we can't document it in a public report.
Which means you can't close out the case.
And I think to this day, it is still an unsolved open case.
Welcome to Socialite Crime Club. What sort of horrific jaw-dropper are you sharing with socialites today?
You know, I really pondered about even telling this story. A decade ago, I wouldn't have. But I think enough time has passed. It's time to talk about it. Our socialites will not find this one in any news headlines. There's very little in police reports. This week, we're going deep undercover. You know, there was a period in my life I refused to go to Mexico.
I do recall this.
From about 2003 until probably 2018, I refused to enter the country of Mexico because I was terrified I would be kidnapped and killed by a cartel.
Well, I think you still have some of that terror. We're just really careful when and how we get into Mexico.
This week is a really fun case for me because you see a lot of big cases and you think the FBI, the DEA, there's some type of major national law enforcement agency. What is fun about this case? It's a case of 100% wrong place, wrong time, right detective with some time on his hands. And there is nothing more dangerous in America than a really tenacious detective.
Absolutely.
So we're going to get into that. But we're going to start, this is a 2002 case. So we got to go all the way back to August 2nd of 2002.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about Gilbert, Arizona, a little tiny sleepy town, little suburban town, suburbia. Gilbert, I would consider an upscale community.
Yeah, it is upscale. It's very middle class. It's a bedroom community. Not a ton of businesses, lots of local businesses. Though
Especially back then in 2002, no businesses.
There really weren't a lot of businesses. There was some regular food chains and, things that people need kind of on a daily basis.
In 2000, Gilbert was 100,000 residents, no hotels, no car dealerships, no trailer parks.
There still are no trailer parks.
There are still no trailer parks. They got a thing for trailer parks. But it was also one of the fastest growing communities in the United States. And that's going to play into this a little bit because of the big housing boom. Had a major impact on this case. In 1995, Gilbert, Arizona had 48,000 residents. 5 years later, in 2000, they were just about to 101,000. 5 years after that, 2005, they'd already hit 156,000. One of the, like I said, fastest growing communities in the country.
Yeah.
And the housing boom was just out of control.
Yeah.
Scaling a police department to match this type of growth is extremely difficult. So there's people that maybe end up in positions they're not really qualified for. There's also a lot of opportunity for young police officers to go out and get into things because a lot is going on around there.
Sure.
And I'm not going to lie, August 2nd, 2002, I was on vacation. I wasn't at work. I was at Lake Powell.
You weren't in Mexico.
I was not in Mexico. I was fat, dumb, and I would have gone to Mexico back then, but I was fat, dumb, and happy at Lake Powell, minding my own business.
And Lake Powell is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I love Lake Powell. What I wasn't aware of is an alarm call that kicked out about 2 o'clock in the morning. Gilbert's always done really well with their response time. When a call comes in for service, how long it takes law enforcement to actually arrive to the house. In this situation, it's about 5 minutes. So an alarm, a burglary alarm, door was opened. goes off. Within 5 minutes, the police department's on scene.
A slow night in Gilbert.
Slow night. It was a slow night in Gilbert back then. When law enforcement gets there, the front door wide open. There's a shoe print on the door next to the door handle, and it's dented in. So it's obvious right off the bat. Oh, somebody kicked the door. Mm-hmm. The inside of the door jamb is fractured a little bit and splintered out. There's a piece of the door jamb on the floor. Okay. So somebody just kicked that door really hard, went right in. Law enforcement enters the house. They start clearing the house, trying to find out what's going on. Okay. They encounter an adult Whodunit. Do you know what a Whodunit is?
It's a dog. Those big gray dogs.
For our animal lovers, prepare yourself. Mm. It's dead. It's in the hallway, and it's been shot multiple times. Whodunit's name, Suede. Because you know how their fur kind of looks like suede.
Yeah, they're kind of shiny and sleek. They have a little bit of texture to them.
We'll talk about suede here in a little bit. Suede actually adds a component to this case that's really helpful. As officers continue to clear the house, they get into the master bedroom and they find a female deceased on the floor. Apparent some type of gunshot wounds to the back of her head. They're not exactly sure what, but it's very obvious she's got major trauma to the back of her head. There's also a Whodunit puppy that's found under the bed that survived. So we do have one survivor, but he's not talking.
Do we know how old the puppy was?
Puppy age? I don't know.
He was just fearful.
Yeah, it was just a little puppy who was really scared under the bed.
Oh.
This was an interesting fact. For years, I remember thinking of this victim as an older lady. When I started putting this case together last week to tell it, I realized she was 48.
She's not so old anymore. You're older than she was. Oh my gosh.
So I kept thinking when I tell the story, I got to tell about that poor old lady who was a widow who got killed. And then I'm like, oh my God, she was just in the prime of her life, like myself. Anyway, 48-year-old female. Her name is Jan Houdek. And Jan is a recent widow. Her husband had died the year before. Just some medical complications. It was a natural death, but some type of medical complications.
Okay.
Jan is a customer service tech at AT&T. So back then, if you called into AT&T, you needed something, Jan is the person who was helping you.
Okay.
And she's trying to get back on her feet. Her husband's death really rocked her. She's had a really hard time getting over that and mourning that. And she's just starting to get back out again.
Sure.
Her injuries are what's really interesting. She was shot twice in the back of the head, point blank range. But the way that her body fell to the floor and the blood spatter and the way that her bed sheets are positioned, it tells a pretty interesting story. Jan was pulled out of bed, immediately put onto her knees, and then double tapped in the back of the head at point blank range. And what I mean by double tap.
So she was executed.
She was executed. And a lot of people probably don't understand. This is not necessarily something that's that easy to do, to get your rounds right on top of each other. You intentionally have to pull the trigger twice as fast as you can. It's not like, oh, I shot her. Ooh, I should probably just shoot her one more time. This is a very intentional pop, and then they're out. Okay. Jan has a very expensive ring on. There's jewelry in the house. There's cash wide open in her purse. There's some other valuables in the house. Nothing is disturbed. So in under 5 minutes, whoever this is kicks in the front door, shoots a dog in the hallway, goes immediately to the master bedroom, pulls Jan out of bed, puts her on her knees, shoots her twice in the back of the head. As she's falling to the floor, he's out of there.
It sounds like the dog was probably doing some security when they came in and was barking maybe. Probably. They needed to shut it up.
Yeah, I'm sure that's the first thing that happened is that dog heard the door being kicked and immediately just lost its mind going at the door barking. And that's the first thing that shot.
Oh, this is going to be a terrible story already. I can tell.
But this is an execution.
Yeah.
That is one thing that was just profound. And I got to be honest, in 2002 in Gilbert, we didn't have a lot of executions.
No, there really wasn't. Nobody was stealing cookies in Gilbert then.
Yeah, it was very over the top for the type of cases we were encountering. Now, I was really busy on another huge case that I happened to catch the year before, and we'll get into that case one of these days, but not yet. So I didn't have a lot to do with this initial investigation. I had heard a few things. I'd looked through the crime scene photos because I was really into blood spatter back then. I liked to study crime scenes and try to figure out, piece together what was happening.
Yeah.
But I didn't have a lot to do with the initial investigation. A couple things that really stood out to me, though, is the house wasn't rummaged. It is very, very clear this was an intentional execution. The goal was to kill her and leave as fast as they could.
Okay.
No signs of criminal behavior at all with Jan. She has a very, very clean history. She is the ideal role model citizen. Okay. Like, she hasn't even cheated on her taxes. Like, she's squeaky clean.
Right.
So
okay. I'm sure she washes her car every week.
Probably. But it just put another layer of she doesn't have a high risk lifestyle that would in any way support this type of a death. Not that anybody does, but some people, when you're executed, typically it's because you've done some dumb shit, right?
Right.
And everything's
you owe
catching
somebody
up.
something, or you've embarrassed somebody somehow.
Right. And things finally catch up to you. Mm-hmm. This isn't that. This is a true whodunit. And why the hell would they do it like this?
Sure.
So for about a year, the investigation's going to look into friends and family. It hits this one oddball guy. We're going to call him Mr. Bean. He befriended Jan. He was friends actually with Jan and her husband before her husband died. And then he remained friends with Jan. He'd come over and mow the lawn. He was just helping out. I think he kind of had a thing for Jan.
Oh.
And for some reason, a handful of investigators really thought he was a good candidate. But at the end of the day, he was the only candidate because he was the only person that was actually in contact with Jan on a regular basis. He was guilty by association.
Now, did Jan have children? Do we know?
No, there's really no kids. It's a very, very quiet female living by herself with no family in the area and no immediate family to speak of. I think she had a couple sisters, maybe, if I remember right. It's been a long time, but no immediate family in the area at all.
And she just goes to work.
Right. And Mr. Bean is the suspect because there's no other suspect.
Sure. Yeah.
But he has nothing to do with it.
Which a lot of small agencies would quickly cling to for a potential target and a suspect.
Yes. And that's a problem in this case. About a year goes and there's no real leads. Like there's really no idea of what happened to Jan. Then there's going to be a press release. I'll leave a couple names out of it, but I'm going to quote some things that were told to the press by the Gilbert Police Department. They started off the press release with, "It's just like the movie title. I know what you did last summer. This happened in August. This is coming out on the year anniversary of Jan's death. And this is how we start the news release."
Okay.
Quote, "I would encourage him and his associates to simply come forward to save us all some time." Because, whoever executes people, when they read a headline like that, they're just immediately going to get
they're going to call and be like, "It was me."
You're right. I'm sorry I wasted your time. We have significantly more information than the killer is aware of.
You guys didn't have anything, did you?
We didn't have jack shit. Like nobody knew anything. And then finally, the last statement was something along the line is that there's a clear connection between Jan and her killer, be it personal or be it through other associations.
Based on what little I know about this case, that statement is completely false.
It could not be any further from the truth. So, yeah, this news release comes out and I found it and I was reading it when I was putting this together and I had to sit there and giggle for a while because it couldn't have been any further off. So it's kind of a funny statement. At the same time, the police department's going through some changes though. Okay. We get a new commander who has a lot of experience and he's looking at this case and he says, "You know what? It's just time for new eyes." And that's a really important role that I think a lot of law enforcement misses. I tell people a lot of times, you know what the biggest handicap or the biggest challenge to law enforcement is these days?
I know this answer.
You do know. What is it?
Ego.
Law enforcement has a habit of when they get one of these cases, especially a really juicy whodunit case, they don't want to give it up. They don't want to share it. And I've taught this subject matter for years now. And I used to tell classes, it's like you get a little bunny. You've got this nice, cute, cuddly bunny. But you're like a 10-year-old who just wants to hoard your bunny. No, don't touch my bunny.
Yeah.
And I used to tell people all the time, share your bunny. Let other people pet your bunny.
Yeah. Stop being an only child.
Yes. Let people pet your bunny. Share the bunny love. And we did this for years in our classes. And we had an instructor who just got out of the military. You remember this. You were there.
I know this story.
He had taken up teaching the pet your bunny story. And this little Hispanic detective, how old was she?
I don't know. I think she was much older than she looked. She had very, very good genes. She's very petite, cute.
I think she was in her late 20s. She was
pretty young.
A little
small town.
Yeah, and Sev is probably in his early 50s at this point.
Yeah.
And she comes up to him on a break, and I'm sitting next to him, but I'm kind of doing my own thing, and she's like, "Sev, I really want you to pet my bunny."
Yeah.
He choked. He didn't know. He's like, "You need me to help you on a case?" And she's like, "Well, yeah, I have this case, but I really need you to pet my bunny."
Well, and there was so no one better because as petite as she was and cute and perfectly put together, and your brother, this big military oof, It was perfect because I've never heard about him being more intimidated by someone.
Yes. Oh, he did not know what to do. So the moral of this story is, as detectives, let people pet your bunny, share your cases. There's nothing more important than getting several sets of eyes on a case.
Yeah.
And this new commander we had knew this. So he put us all together and we had this big briefing, brought in all of the investigators, and they briefed up the case of where they had the case at that time. And during this briefing, a really interesting component came out. A couple of our narcotics guys were in this briefing and they said, hey, you know what? If we just would have had that camera up still. And of course, a few of us in the room are like, what camera? Well, we had this complaint from neighbors that there was possibly a drug house in that neighborhood. So we had a pole camera. So a pole camera is a camera that is mounted in a light or electric pole that we can watch something over a period of time for suspicious behavior. Sometimes, depending on where you're at, you have to have a search warrant. Sometimes you don't. The law allows for it just to be installed. So as we're in this briefing, it comes up that our narcotics officers had borrowed one from the state police to put up on this house that they suspected as some type of drug house.
Okay.
But because it was borrowed, about a week before Jan's death, they had to pull it down. Oh. So we have all this video for about a month and a half, but it wasn't up at the time of her murder. So as they're briefing this and different people are taking different roles of the investigation to look into new aspects, I volunteered to look into the pole camera because I thought it'd be interesting. I said, hey, you know what? I want to dig into this house that was supposedly a drug house. Yeah. And look at the pole camera.
So wait, when you said you wanted to look at the pole camera, I know you. You didn't just go review video.
Oh, no. No, I was really, really interested in the fact that this is a nice neighborhood. It's an upscale neighborhood. Yes. Why would neighbors be calling in, reporting that they think they have a drug house? Sure. What did that pole camera catch? Where is that investigation at? How does it relate to Jan?
Who owns that house next to Jan's?
Yes. When I started digging into why the pole camera was put up, a lot of neighbors were reporting they thought it was a stash house. Let me explain what a stash house is for those of you who may not understand. Yes. It is very common with drug cartels, especially out of Mexico, to own a number of different houses in different communities. So as they transport narcotics into an area, they can store them or warehouse them. And then sometimes when they're transporting cash back to Mexico, where they can hide and store cash until they take a load back into Mexico.
Or people.
More commonly now, people. They may bring a whole bus full of people across, store them in this house for 30 days as they extort the families back in Mexico, and then send them on to the next community. So stash houses are real. It was a real thing. And that's what started this whole pole camera issue. I'm not going to use addresses because there's people who live in these houses now who probably have no idea any of this happened in their neighborhood because it's been long enough.
I think there's a lot of people in Gilbert that have no idea what happened in the house they bought.
And here's something interesting that a lot of people probably don't realize. You do not have to disclose a murder happened in your house to sell it.
I know, isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I've written a handful of search warrants where I've had to go back and knock on doors and explain to people, hey, I'm here about this homicide that happened 5 years ago. I've got to come into your house and redo something. And that's always a fun conversation.
There has to be a moment of panic in those people.
Oh, they freak out. That was never disclosed. Well, they don't have to. It's interesting. This is the other thing that I think people listening should think about. Be proactive in your neighborhood. If you're seeing things like this, report it. Make an issue out of it. Jan might have been saved had this been handled differently or been handled sooner. So it is something to note. It is important to be really vigilant about what's going on in your community.
Yeah.
Now, I am going to change a couple of names. I'm going to keep some of the names the same. One of the names I'm going to change is Olivia. And Olivia is the current owner of the house that the pole camera was pointed at.
Okay.
She's a Mexican national. She technically is in the country illegal at this time. She's a single mom.
Okay.
She's got a son at the time. I think she had 2 sons at the time and an older daughter who was out of the house. She's a good mom. She's very protective of her children. She's a very hard worker. She actually has a pretty big social presence in the greater Phoenix area. So she's fairly well known, especially in the Hispanic community.
Okay.
And for all intents and purposes, she's doing really well. She is providing for her family. She's kind of living the American dream that she moved into the Phoenix area, and she's very successful in what she's doing. When I start digging a little deeper, though, she may have violated a few laws in buying her house.
Oh, dear.
like not using her real name or her real social security number, and maybe falsifying and forging a handful of financial documents in order to
steal
qualify.
Someone's identity then, I'm assuming?
I'm not going to get into all the details, but let's just say they're arrestable offenses.
Okay.
Now, some people might be, well, why are you going to go picking on poor Olivia? She's a hardworking single mom who's just doing it, and you guys are just picking on her.
Right.
Well, because I need to ask Olivia questions, and the type of questions I want to ask her, I don't think she's just going to roll over and answer. So I need to have some type of case that I can force Olivia into a very uncomfortable position to cooperate with this investigation.
Sure.
And I know right off the bat, we're going to have people thinking, well, that's BS. That's a typical cop just picking on somebody.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, let me tell you about a homicide detective's role, their job. I'm trying to solve a homicide. I'm trying to solve the homicide of a poor single female who was doing nothing wrong her entire life, who was executed in her bedroom along with her dog. If I have to make the person who potentially is responsible for this a little uncomfortable, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
And if people have issues with that, you live in a different world. Yes, I make a case against Olivia, and I was pretty harsh about it. But it's also important to know I became pretty good friends with Olivia. Good. We actually developed a little bit of a professional working relationship in which I really believe saved her life in the long run.
Oh,
very interesting story.
Interesting
Yes. But the point of the entire thing is, can I get Olivia to talk? What is going on at her house? And when I reviewed the poll camera to kind of give a little bit of a foundation of why I thought I had to get a case against Olivia, it was obvious she was running some type of a stash house.
When you say it was obvious, what types of things did you see on camera that alluded to that?
About twice a week, a different vehicle, usually some type of a panel van or a large SUV, would pull into the neighborhood. It would back into the garage. The garage door would open, it would back into the garage, garage door would close. Every time, different Hispanic males. And if you know what cartel, especially Sinaloa cartel members look like, they stand out. They were very consistent with that Sinaloa cowboy cartel look. Yes. And the car would be in the garage maybe an hour, and then it leaves.
Yes.
And then 4 or 5 days later.
And she wasn't the type just to have a lot of online boyfriends.
Well, what was interesting about this, a lot of times she wasn't home.
Oh.
She had a real job that required a lot from her. So you would see in the morning, she would leave, the kids would leave. And while she's gone, all of this is happening at her house. And then when she's home, nothing ever happens when she's there. It's only when she's gone. So it is very interesting of how this dynamic is working.
So it sounds like she does have a fair amount of control over the protection of her kids when this is happening.
She appears to be completely separated from the house and having her kids separated from the house when this stuff is going on.
Okay.
But she probably has some knowledge, right? It's pretty
How
clear.
Do you not?
Yeah, it's pretty clear something's going on in her house that she should know about. So Olivia's ex-husband's brother owns this shuttle company that runs people and cargo back and forth between the Arizona-Mexico border and Phoenix. They've got stations in Lukeville, a little tiny speck of a town, and Nogales. And they're just constantly driving these vans back and forth.
And where does her ex-husband live at this time?
He's all over the place, but he's associated very closely with this transportation company.
Okay.
And I'll cut ahead about 7 years. This transportation company is going to be federally indicted for transporting people and drugs illegally. It's a front for narcotic trafficking.
Okay.
But that's her ex-husband's brother who owns that, and her ex-husband has a big role in that as well.
Okay.
They have a daughter, her ex-husband and her do. And at this time in 2002, the daughter's older. She's in her early to mid-20s.
Okay.
There's going to be an arranged marriage coming up. It's really weird, right? Olivia's a good mom. She's always provided. She's got this American dream. Her daughter, Penelope, has completely inherited this work ethic, very hardworking, no-nonsense type of chick. Mm-hmm. But because Penelope's dad's kind of he arranges this marriage. And it's a brokered marriage between him and a cartel. The cartel is known as the Los Numeros. It
was an arranged marriage between her and multiple people in the cartel, or
one person in the cartel, but it was brokered to benefit the transportation company and the cartel together.
Oh, this is crazy. How old was she?
I want to say she was probably 23, maybe 22, 23 when this all goes down.
So she's in the prime of her independence as a female in the United States, just doing her thing, being happy and looking forward to her future.
Crazy, right? And this is a Sinaloa Cartel. Sinaloa cartels are no joke, especially in 2002. There's a lot of things going on in that corridor, if you will, of central Mexico coming up to the Arizona border.
Yes.
It is, and it still is, the largest and most powerful narcotic drug trafficking organization in the world. And some people might be like, wait, I've heard of names. I haven't heard of that one. I'll cut to the chase. Chapo Guzman. If you've ever heard of Chapo Guzman, this is his corridor, his drug route, if you will, is the Sinaloa Cartel controls that. He needs muscle to run those drugs through central Mexico into Arizona, and then at least that initial distribution out of Arizona. And his number one group to doing that is the Los Números cartel, the numbers.
Okay.
And it's the leader of that cartel, number 9, that Penelope's dad brokers this deal with.
Okay.
And essentially, number 9 and Penelope are going to become married, and it kind of strengthens these two families, right? You have the transportation company north of the border, you have the Los Números south of the border, and now you have a common tie of those two families between this marriage, and it really positions them. For our listeners, especially if you know nothing about cartels, in 2002, it was crazy in Mexico. Everybody's fighting for spaces. So everybody wants to control these different routes, if you will, and it is insane. There is a full-on war going on in 2002. So that was part of this arrangement, is to help strengthen and bolster families, if you will. So the Los Números, there's 4 brothers. Number 9 is a guy by the name of Raul Enrique Parra. And I have not changed his name. Okay. He is the leader. He's the one that's running the show. He's got a brother, and I'm not even going to try to say it. He's number 11. What's the brother's name?
El Defenso.
Yeah, I'm just going to call him number 11. And then there's Wilfredo, number 7. And then there's Daniel.
Daniel.
We're just going to call...
doesn't even have a number.
Well, he died
0?
really soon. Yeah, we're going to call him number 0. In 2000, 2001, there's a big cartel war going between a family in Tijuana and the Parras. And Daniel is in the middle of that one.
It would be the Parras.
Okay. Daniel's in the middle of that war. Daniel's going to be killed, probably decapitated and hung off of a bridge as a message to the Parra brothers, don't come up here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's
Do we know how old
hardcore.
Daniel was or not?
He was young at the time. I want to say he was maybe 22, 23. He was the youngest of the Parras at the time. The numbers owned the Navajoa area. And if you don't know where Navajoa is, it's on the west coast of Mexico, about central Mexico. So I would say halfway between Mexico City and the U.S. border, Navajoa, and it's a mountain range that goes through there. They controlled that entire corridor all the way to Arizona. And then they had a distribution system in Arizona. So that's where this marriage is going from. And some of this I was able to dig up through intel reports. There's a lot of reporting in Mexico from journalists, and we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. So in looking at Olivia and figuring out, okay, here's who she is. Holy cow, look who she used to be married to. Oh my goodness, look at who her daughter is. So I kind of had a pretty good idea. Olivia's not what I would call the best neighbor to have at this point, but can I get her to talk is the question.
You're a high-risk lifestyle by living next to Olivia.
Yes. I want to tie in one other thing just to kind of give people a really good understanding of what we're up against here. Christopher Eggle. He was a national park ranger.
Okay.
Really good guy. Eagle Scout, went to college, played some college ball. Just a good guy. Was working in the Oregon Pipe National Monument. It's not Oregon, the state, by the way. This is a national park that's right on the border of Mexico. They have a lot of drug cartel trafficking through this national park. So one of Christopher's jobs was interdicting drug traffickers. Well, on August 9th, there was a major execution that had just been carried out in Mexico, where somebody ordered the hit of a big drug boss.
Okay.
When they got there, the drug boss wasn't there, so they killed a whole bunch of his underlings. Mexican law enforcement showed up, chased them north. They crossed the border into the U.S. into this national park.
Oh, dear.
Mexican police authorities are working with U.S. police authorities, and they're trying to track this guy. They found the broken down vehicle that they fled from, and Christopher comes across these 2 suspects in the national park. One of them, who's known by El Zarco, had an AK-47 and opened up fire on poor Christopher, killing Christopher. So Christopher was actually killed in the line of duty The hit that was ordered by number 9. So just so people are understanding, not only is Penelope tied to this fairly violent cartel, around this time, August of 2002, this cartel is known for ordering hitmen to go whack and execute other people.
And it was Raul.
It was Raul who ordered the hit.
Her husband.
Penelope's no victim. She takes this marriage as this is my new life, and she invests fully into it.
Okay.
She actually becomes a major role of the cartel. She's an attractive, young, educated, very articulate young lady with the motivation to work. And she does very well on the U.S. side of the border, brokering deals. So as Penelope takes a more active role in the cartel, and the cartel they're growing. The business is good.
Okay.
They need more stash houses. Well, getting stash houses under the radar is very difficult. You don't want a stash house where you have a lot of valuable product or cash in really crappy neighborhoods. You want to hide them in plain sight, but in upscale communities.
Right. There's less chance for break-ins.
They want to be safe too.
Yeah.
So Penelope has an idea.
Oh.
Hey, Mom, let's talk. We'll help you buy your house. We'll pay for your house. We just need to use it from time to time.
Well, I'm sure it was more difficult to refuse as well because her house wasn't bought under necessarily legal means.
Correct. And this is going to open a hornet's nest when we start to get to this point. We just figured out how a major cartel is buying stash houses. Now put yourself in the role of a cartel. You buy a stash house completely under the radar. It's working. What do? You replicate that plan.
Right.
We just figured out that plan. In a matter of about a month and a half, we're going to identify 7 other stash houses within the greater Phoenix area.
Oh my gosh. Were they close together or pretty spread out?
All spread out. They were very good about keeping these spread out. Which brings me to another funny side story of this case.
Okay.
We had this detective we worked with, and please understand, I respect the shit out of this detective. She was a lot of fun to work with, and she had some really big cases over the years. But she was kind of a conspiracy theorist. She always had these crazy conspiracies she was trying to sell people on that, oh, look at this crime. If this happened, then this could have happened. And by the time she's done, it's like the entire country is involved in this weird crime.
But there weren't UFOs living next door or something.
It wouldn't surprise me if, it could have been a UFO. Nothing at this point would surprise me when I was talking to her about these different cases. And she used to come into work all the time, swearing up and down that a drug cartel bought the house next to her.
Does she live near Olivia?
No, she lives way on the south side, not even in the same town.
Oh, okay.
And it's a nice house. They're in these nice county islands. It's about an acre, maybe an acre and a half piece of property, but they're nice homes. They're really nice homes. So
county islands are basically separate from the major city that they're next to.
Right.
But they have large pieces of land.
Think of like acre and a half lots with horse privileges and all that other stuff, but in town, if you will.
Yeah.
And these are nice houses. I knew where she lived. Her husband had his own job. He was self-employed. He did pretty well. So they had a nice place. And I used to always remember thinking like, yes, of course, a drug cartel lives next to you. And she carried on about this for years and years and years.
Okay. And the cartel has horses and diamonds with their...
And they do live next to her.
Oh, gosh.
So as this case progresses, sure as shit, the Los Números, the numbers, has one of their primary hubs next to our detective, who's been telling everybody for the last year that they're there, and we're all just blowing her off because she always has some crazy conspiracy.
So did they actually have like farming equipment and like animals that lived on this property?
Yes, they did have a couple horses, but they had this giant barn and you could drive through it. So it had like the full garage doors on both sides. And eventually this house is going to be swallowed up in part of this operation. And what we find when we get into this place, it's really interesting. Vehicles would pull in from one side, they would get loaded up with narcotics and then just pull out the other side. But you had a lot of language barriers. And sometimes the people driving, even if it wasn't a language barrier, they're not all that educated. So they assigned animals to each of the different routes. So all I would know is I need to go to this address. I'm going to pull in this garage and there's going to be a stall, like a horse stall, with a wild boar painted on it. And I take whatever's in that stall, put it in my car, and I leave. And the next guy shows up and he's like, I'm the donkey. And they load up the donkey stall. And the next guy shows up, I've got an eagle. They load up the eagle stall.
Well, in a way, this is genius because it really prevents people from talking to each other and providing the opportunity for anything to leak.
Yes. It was set up like a full-blown, very military precise operation.
Wow.
Except for they moved it next to a detective who's like, I'm telling you, it's the narcos.
Yeah.
And all of us are like, you're crazy.
Yeah.
Well, sure enough, it was the narcos. But this is going to start opening some doors. So now we've found out, okay, here's the connection to Olivia. Olivia's connections to Penelope. Penelope's husband is operating this entire thing. Here is their major hub now that has just been discovered. So we understand who's got that. And now we run across number 7, because when we figure out that hub, we figure out number 7's connection to that hub, and he lives in Avondale, which is the west side of Phoenix.
Sure.
So ultimately, we're going to end up targeting him. Well, we are starting to make an impact. We've hit a couple stash houses now. We've had some pretty good arrests.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say that we knew a lot of information about this cartel, but we knew a lot of information about this cartel now. And we're little tiny podunk Gilbert PD.
Yeah.
Now, at this point, the DEA is assisting us. Border Patrol's assisting us. We kind of have a bigger task force going. But we're creating enough of a wave that one day I get a phone call from Olivia, because we've been talking a little bit on the side. And Olivia tells me, Raul just showed up. He showed up and he asked me to go for a ride. He had number 7 with him. I'm like, well, what did you do? And she's like, well, I didn't know what to do, so I got in the car. Don't ever get in the car. Like, what are you doing? And she's telling me they were here to kill me. I'm sure of it. And Raul apologizes to her and tells her, sorry, we had this misunderstanding. I think we can get everything ironed out and fixed now. Here's some money. I'm going to need you to go buy a couple houses, and we're going to work things out.
Wait, misunderstanding?
Well, Olivia's not being super truthful with us yet, so I don't know what this means, but it puts the fear of God into Olivia that she thinks Raul's back and is going to kill her. So this is the first time Olivia's going to start to really talk to us about some historical things.
Okay.
But we were able to figure out enough to really start squeezing this cartel that it disrupted their system, and now they're having to kind of fix things, if you will.
But they don't think it's Olivia's fault, do they? Or they somehow think that it's their fault or Olivia just happens to be in the mix?
You know, it's funny. I had the same concerns when I was talking to Olivia. Like, okay, Olivia, there's clearly things you're not telling us. Let's sit down and really have a good talk. And Olivia's finally going to spill the beans.
Okay.
Her house was a stash house, but not for narcotics. She was the cash house. At any given time, Olivia would have over $4 million stashed in that house. The vans that were coming to her house were dropping off cash or picking up cash. When little Gilbert PD had our poll camera on the house, there was over $4 million in the house.
Oh my gosh.
Sure would have been nice to bust it back then.
Where were they putting it? Could you imagine the RICO things you could have purchased with that?
There was a room that was dedicated just for cash storage. And the whole concept was, hey, Olivia, you and your kids live on that side of the house. You come and go. You do what you want. We will come and go from the garage. When we get through the garage, there's this bedroom over here. We'll use that bedroom. Stay out of there. Don't mess with it.
You won't bother anything on that side of the house.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And she was doing it.
Okay.
Till one day she gets a call from her oldest son. I think he's maybe 10 or 12 at the time. There's these weird people in the house, and there's these bundles of things everywhere, and the house stinks. Oh, and they have guns, Mom. She freaks out, takes off from work, drives straight home, gets there and finds basically a cartel delivery team, all very well armed, with about 2,500 pounds of marijuana.
That's why the house stunk.
That's why the house stinks. And she loses her shit. So Olivia, and you've got to think about the balls on Olivia at this point. No, Olivia calls Raul directly. Get these people the hell out of my house. And Raul's like, yeah, we've got a problem with one of our delivery houses. They're going to be there. Just don't worry about it. They'll leave later.
Yeah, she went straight mama bear.
And she was like, no, you don't understand. If they're not gone in 10 minutes, I'm calling the cops. And Raul's like, yeah, slow your roll. You're not calling anybody. This is why we bought this house. We'll leave in a little while. There's cops at this other house or close to this other house we are going to deliver to. We can't go over there right now. They're just there for a little while. Relax. And she loses her shit. No, I won't relax. Get your people the hell out of here. Have them take their shit or I'm calling the cops. So they load up all the cars and they leave.
Oh, this isn't good.
That was July 30th. of 2002. Roughly 3 days later, somebody kicks in Jan Houdek's door, pulls her out of bed, puts her on the ground, and shoots her twice in the back of the head. Like I said,
after killing her dog.
Like I said earlier, I'm not going to say addresses because people live in these houses now.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say the addresses are similar enough between the stash house and Jan's house that if you transpose two numbers, you would be at the other house.
Oh, no. This is
Dyslexia. Basically, this completely changes the case. So not only have we identified, okay, the cartel is running a major operation in the same neighborhood Jan was killed at, the addresses are very similar between Jan's house and the stash house. And 3 days before Jan's murder, the person who lives at this other house gave Raul a reason to kill her. He was done with her. And it's at the same time he's ordering the hits.
On law enforcement officers. Oh my gosh.
So like it all starts to make sense where we're like, holy cow, this is what's going on.
And Raul works for Chapo.
Raul at the time works for Chapo.
Raul is beginning to sound like a liability for Chapo.
It's interesting you're saying that. Stand by, because things are about to get a little bit better.
Okay.
Now, this is where, depending on your sense of humor, and I'm going to leave out some U.S. attorneys' names, and I'm thinking the statute of limitations has passed for me, but I'm not sure yet. So let me tell you the next part of this. The person who was running the drug house next to the officer that I was making fun of about the conspiracies, I have changed his name. We're going to call him Ricardo.
Okay.
So Ricardo's running this house. He gets swooped up in the big raid. They figure it out. They bust his house. He's in federal custody, and he gets moved out way back east. So he's in a federal prison out east. Come to find out, when we're talking to Olivia and we start looking at phone calls.
When you say out east, as in the East Coast, not Eastern Arizona.
Yeah, East Coast. But when we start looking at phone calls and the organization as a whole and what we're learning from Olivia and what we're seeing through some of these transactions, it's really, really clear Ricardo kind of ran the operation on the ground in Phoenix. Anything that's going down in Phoenix is going through Ricardo. If for some reason Raul wanted Olivia dead, it would probably be Ricardo that would somehow be facilitating what's happening in that area.
Okay.
So I want to go interview Ricardo.
Okay.
So I was talking to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They were like, no, we're working a much bigger case than your murder. I knew that this tied to Chapo. So there's obviously a huge push to get a case against Chapo Guzman at the time. I understood in the big pecking order, I was a very small person.
Mm-hmm.
But then I had this conversation with my sergeant, who was a little bit crazy himself. So probably wasn't a good combination. I asked him, I said, well, why do we have to have permission to interview somebody in federal custody?
Uh-huh.
Why can't we just fly out there? If the prison lets us in and sets him down and we have a conversation, why are we asking for permission? And he thought, that's a really good point. I don't know that we do.
Yeah, you can't tell me what to do, feds.
Get on a plane and go.
Yeah, go.
So I booked my ticket and I flew out to the prison.
Okay.
Asked to speak to Ricardo. They brought him right out like nothing.
Oh, you guys shared cookies and milk together?
Ricardo and I became actually really good friends during this conversation.
Oh, clearly he liked you more than the feds.
No, I just did something that nobody else had done that completely changed the narrative. Sometimes dumb luck is the only luck we get, so you got to run with it.
Yeah.
Ricardo's got an attorney. So when the federal government was going through the process of interviewing Ricardo about what's going on with the cartel, they had to go through his attorney legally.
Oh.
Because they're working a case against him.
He'd already invoked in some way that they had to go through his attorney.
Yeah, but I didn't care about all that. I had a completely different case. He could invoke to me, but I don't care what they're working on.
Yeah.
His attorney was paid for by Raul. So how willing do you think Ricardo is to talk about anything when his attorney is sitting right next to him, knowing he's going to report whatever he says back to Raul, and then he's going to kill his family if
We've actually been through something similar with investors.
Kind of.
I totally understand how he feels.
Yeah, so he didn't want to talk at all. He wasn't talking to the feds. Well, when I just showed up out of the blue and the prison's like, yeah, we don't care. Here, talk to him.
Yeah.
Attorney has no idea. It's the first time the attorney is completely not involved.
Oh my gosh, you're like talking to a priest for him.
Yes, and he had a lot to say. He walks me through the entire operation. No problem. When we start to get into the issues with Olivia, he cops to it immediately. He said, I feel really bad about that because they knew they hit the wrong house afterwards.
Oh my gosh. So he is the one who actually ordered the hit then on Houdek?
Raul ordered the hit.
Okay.
So Raul basically tells Ricardo, I'm sending a guy up. I'm done with my crazy ass mother-in-law. This guy's going to take care of her. When he gets to you, you take him. He'll tell you where he needs to go. You guys give him basically transportation, if you will.
This is getting so good.
It is exciting, isn't it?
Yes.
So Ricardo is actually telling me, no, I gave him the address. He gave me the address. We drove to the neighborhood. I'm not going to park right in front of the house. So I'm parking down from the house a ways. He gets out. He's gone for maybe 5 minutes. Comes back, jumps in the car, says it's done, and off we go. And it isn't until about 36 hours later, Olivia calls Penelope, and Penelope's talking to her mom like nothing's wrong. And of course, Raul's like, I'm sorry, who are you talking to? And they realize, oh shit, who did we kill? And they start looking at news reports and they figure out we killed the wrong person. He went to the wrong house. He literally kicked in the door like 3 houses down. To recap how this goes down.
Sure.
Olivia throws out Raul's drug transporters because they brought weed instead of money. Pissed her off. And she tells him, get your shit and get out of here. I'm calling the cops. This pisses Raul off. He's in Mexico. Raul's like, hey, I'm done with my mother-in-law. He calls Ricardo and tells Ricardo, I'm sending up a hitman. He's coming out of Mexico. He'll be there tomorrow. When he gets there, he has an address of where my mother-in-law lives. Take him to the house. He's going to whack my mother-in-law, bring him back, and he's going to come back to Mexico. Sure enough, this guy shows up. We don't know who this guy is. He just shows up, explains why he's there. Ricardo takes him to the neighborhood. Dude gets out of the car, goes to the wrong house, kills Jan Houdek, comes back, jumps in the car, goes back to Mexico. Raul sees that Penelope's talking to Olivia a few days later and realizes, shit, who did they kill?
Did we ever determine, or did Ricardo ever actually say who this dyslexic hitman was?
He didn't know him that well. He only knew him by nickname. But things change here.
Okay.
This is where Ricardo starts speaking a little bit between the lines. And he's been very upfront this whole interview until I get to this part. And Ricardo explains, we took care of him, though. I'm like, well, what do you mean we took care of him? Well, he came back the next week. Raul sent him back.
Because he did such a good job the first time.
And Ricardo wouldn't admit that it was him, but he did admit that he was present when they took him out into the desert and they shot him in the back of the head and they left him in the desert.
Oh my God.
And at this point, I'm starting to question, I wonder if Ricardo's the one that actually killed Jan. And he's making up this story to insulate a little bit like, hey, just so you know, the guy who killed Jan is dead. So I start pushing him a little bit about like, yeah, that's not going to work. Where in the desert? How do we find, like, who was he? How big was he? What was his size? What did he look like?
Sure.
How did you get there? How far of a drive? And he actually starts explaining, no, there's this old abandoned track. It's like a NASCAR track. It's out in the middle of the desert, kind of south of Phoenix.
Okay.
And in one corner of that track, there's a bunch of trees and a little pond. And I'm bringing up the map and I'm looking at a map as he's explaining this. And I can't think of a NASCAR track.
But he's being pretty specific.
He's being very specific. And the only NASCAR track is Phoenix International Raceway, which is way out west. Not going to confuse the two. Well, I start looking at the map as he's explaining this to me. Volkswagen had an old proving grounds out in the desert south of Phoenix with a big oval track. And I'm zooming in, and sure enough, there's one corner of the track that's got this little trees area with a pond. Thinking, holy crap, okay, he's actually, without him looking at the map, he's describing a place that I could find. So I fly back. I meet with the county sheriff where this little track is at. Sure enough, about a year prior to me going out and talking to Ricardo, they recovered a dead body from underneath a tree next to the pond.
A Wando.
I was about to say. A Mexican national who met the description perfectly, and he has been a Wando since then. That they've never known who the identity is. And we actually figure out who he is based on Ricardo's description. And the gunshot injuries matched exactly what Ricardo said.
What were the gunshot injuries? Do you remember?
Double tap to the back of the head, just like Jen.
It's a lot of consistencies here with the
cartel. A lot of consistencies. So at this point, though, we are starting to put a really good case together. Now, ultimately, here's what we have. Ricardo's never getting out of prison. His drug trafficking charges are major. He's not going anywhere. The person who actually killed Jan is dead. The only one left that could really have some responsibility to this is Raul. Number 9. And this whole meeting that Olivia explained to us was they had this big falling out. Penelope figured out what happened with her husband ordering the hit on her mom. So there's just a lot of
dynamics.
A lot of strife in the family.
Yeah.
It makes Thanksgiving odd.
Yeah.
I think they all kind of came to Jesus, we all love each other again, kumbaya. And this was Raul's attempt to basically apologize, like, hey, sorry for that one time I tried to kill you, but let's work something out.
My wife is making life kind of rough at home right now.
Let me just say, Penelope's not happy with me.
Could you imagine those conversations?
Remember that one time I tried to kill your mom? There's some other things that are happening, though. There is a person by the name of Alfredo Jimenez Mota. He's a journalist. No relation to anybody in this cartel at all, or anybody surrounding
This is
the
an
cartel.
upstanding guy in Mexico doing his job.
He's a 25-year-old investigative reporter, and he is on the numbers cartel like a madman. He is reporting all kinds of stuff. He has a lot of really good sources. He's actually linked Raul to a lot of federal agents within Mexico. And apparently he's got phone calls of some of these things.
Oh my gosh.
And he's about to break stories wide open about Raul's infiltration, if you will, of federal agents within Mexico that's allowing him to control these corridors.
This is very dangerous for him.
Well, it was dangerous enough that he was killed right after that. And it was later exposed that around the same time, Number 9 arranged for his kidnapping and ultimately his torture and killing him.
Oh my gosh.
So there's a lot going on. Now, you said something really interesting a minute ago about, I wonder how Chapo feels about all of this. And I'm thinking, I've got the golden goose here. I can connect Raul to a murder. Our star witness is already in prison. Where's he going to go? If Olivia testifies, I think I've got this great case. So I go back to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I'm like, hey, remember me? I was the guy you said, don't talk to Ricardo. Well, I went and talked to him anyway. Look what I've got. They lost their shit. They literally told me they were going to arrest me and indict me because I'm interfering with their investigation.
They did not give a shit about your homicide,
they told
did they?
me to get the F out of their building and never come back. I remember the attorney's name to this day. I won't say who she is. She actually went on to have a very illustrious career in the U.S. Attorney's Office. But yeah, they straight up threatened to arrest me if I had anything to do with this case from this point forward because they're targeting Chapo. And ultimately, they're going to get Chapo. And I was screwing that up.
So did anything you do help them with their case at all?
Oh, yeah. We created so much strife. This nobody of a detective running around Gilbert was creating such a damn stir that it threw the whole cartel out of whack.
This sounds really familiar.
Yeah, like I said, don't ever underestimate somebody who's very tenacious and has some time on their hands. I'm still trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to get Raul. I'm going to figure out how to finish this case. I'm going to get an arrest warrant for Raul for murder. Okay. And sooner or later, he's going to cross the border. And I'm going to stay in tabs with Olivia. And one of these days, maybe I can figure this out. And I'm still working the case. Well, about 6 months goes by when I got a call from a DEA person that I worked a lot of cases with on this particular case. He says, hey, I've got some pictures I want to show you. So we meet up. They're Raul.
What kind of pictures?
Well, Raul made enough of a stir or a stink, if you will, that he fell out of an airplane.
He was the liability for Chapo that I mentioned.
Yeah. I don't know if when he fell out of the airplane, he was already dead. They actually abducted him and 3 others, duct taped their head, and this is a signature cartel thing where they wrap your entire head in duct tape as tight as they can, but they'll cut slots so that you can still breathe. The reason they're doing this is now they can torture you by beating the shit out of you. It doesn't get blood anywhere. It keeps all of your parts together for the most part, and it actually takes you a really long time to die. It's just a terrible...
Because everything is being held together by pressure.
It's just a terrible, terrible way to go. They torture him terribly, end up killing him. They wrap him up in an American flag, put him on a plane, fly it over his ranch in Navajoa, and push him out so he falls and lands in the front yard along with these other 3. And it was a message. Stop screwing things up on the U.S. side. You guys are creating problems for us. Stop it.
Oh my!
And it was well received because it changed the course of things for a while.
You know, I know that's really, really horrendous. It's terrible.
No, it's not. It's just desserts.
Well,
he had it coming.
Okay, so now that you're saying that, I feel like there are a lot of corporations in America that if they ran business cartel style when managing employees, they just make a public mockery of terrible decision makers, these corporations and businesses would run so much better.
It sounds like you might have some personal angst coming out here.
I do. I do. And I think you understand how I feel. But anyway, go on.
Yeah, so...
I understand Chapo a little bit.
Yeah, you're relating, at least briefly.
Yeah.
I get it. I'm thinking, well, crap, there went my case. Raul's dead. There's nobody to hold accountable. Raul's dead. So I was actually really disappointed because I wanted to arrest Raul desperately.
Okay.
But at the same time, I'm trying to think, okay, how do I ever actually close this case out? I need to get to bringing some type of closure down. I can't just run off of Ricardo's statements because, I mean, he is a convicted felon. Penelope might be ripe for the picking. Her husband just died. There's probably a power struggle there. If I could get Penelope to tell me the rest of this story, I have two different sources telling me the same thing. I feel comfortable closing the case out.
How was she feeling about her husband's death? It was an arranged marriage, but she was proffering from the arranged marriage. Was she okay?
A few months later, I caught up with Penelope. And here's what I will tell you. Maybe she was mourning, but she was doing it at Burberry. And she had spent quite a bit of money that day.
She's like, thank you, my husband.
So she had spent the day at the Scottsdale Fashion Mall, had done some shopping at some very high-end stores, still had about $100,000 in cash on her. And somehow, I won't get into some of the specifics, we knew she was in the U.S. We knew when she crossed the border. We knew that she crossed the border with a large amount of cash that she didn't claim.
Was her primary residence in the U.S. or was she living in Mexico?
No, she was still living in Mexico. So we waited, and she met up with a couple of other people who we suspected were also narcotic traffickers. And when they did a little exchange, we popped them in a parking lot, more or less. I took Penelope to the police department. I didn't care what happened to the other guys. We gave them to DEA. She had her nanny with her and her daughter.
Oh, how old was her daughter?
Young, maybe a year.
Oh, very
probably
tiny.
not even a year.
Oh,
yeah, she had just given birth just before Raul was killed.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so I'm interviewing Penelope, and I break this whole thing down, and she confirms it. She was aware of the phone call between her mom and Raul that pissed off Raul. She explains the entire thing. She did not know about the hit initially, but she knew when she heard the story that that's what he would do. Like, it didn't surprise her at all that that's what Raul's reaction would have been.
It's just the way life was.
Yeah, you're a part of a cartel. That's how they do business.
Yeah.
But she goes ahead and confirms the entire story and basically corroborates everything Ricardo told us. So at this point, I'm ready to close this case. I can never prosecute anybody because everybody's dead at this point, except for Ricardo, who's in prison the rest of his life.
Nobody's talking.
And I'm thinking, all in all, it's a good case.
Yeah.
Think of all the money I saved the taxpayers.
Right.
Like, there is no trials here, right? Well, I go to start writing this case back, and U.S. Attorney's Office gets back in the mix a little bit because they figured out that I had talked to Penelope, which I'll come back to a really funny story with Penelope here in a minute.
Okay.
I am now further ordered by the U.S. Attorney's Office that, hey, remember we told you we will arrest you? If you document this and cause it to be a public report, we will also indict you. So we get in this weird catch-22 where we have solved Jan Houdek's homicide.
There's no one to prosecute.
There's no one to prosecute, and we can't document it in a public report.
Which means you can't close out the case.
And I think to this day, it is still an unsolved open case.
This is crazy.
I have been asked multiple times by the police department, can you please write the report? And I'm like, That U.S. attorney was serious, and she was mean.
Okay, so what happens if for some reason they still don't want this documented, but you're talking about it?
Well, I've been thinking a lot about that. They can't do anything about. These are my experiences. It's something that happened. In no way was I in a classified position or was I sworn into some type of secrecy. I was just Joe Schmuckatelli cop who happened to do my job and ran across things, and there's nothing to stop.
So you're kind of saying F the feds right now?
Kind of. Well, and Chapo's in prison. He ain't getting out. Like, the big fish that they were really going for, all that's transpired. But that's why I said 10 years ago, I would have never told this story.
Yeah.
And I would also be worried that some of the people involved, if this got out, would be in severe, life-threatening, dire situations. Yeah. But that's all changed now. In fact, I'm happy to report Olivia and Penelope are doing really well. And I'll just leave it at that.
Good.
They are both doing well. They've recovered from that part of their life. They appear to be very law-abiding, very successful entrepreneurs, and I wish them all the best.
This is good to hear, especially when they're in such a hard place as it is, being
Yeah,
women.
they were definitely taken advantage of.
In a very patriarchal organization like a cartel.
Let's come back to the interview.
Okay.
So I'm doing this interview. I've got this DEA agent with me. Worked with him on a bunch of cases. We've got a good relationship. She's spilling the beans. We think we're hitting pay dirt. We walk out of the interview. The nanny is in our lobby with the baby and the diaper bag.
Okay.
And he asked me, he says, "Hey, did you search the diaper bag?" And I'm like, "No." It's like, "Yeah," because we're getting ready to release her. He's like, "You should probably search the diaper bag before we cut him loose."
Yeah, people put a lot of stuff in diaper bags.
So I go to search the diaper bag. I come across this 1911, which for those of you at home that don't know what a 1911 is, it is a .45 pistol that was actually first made or patented in 1911, the year 1911. It's a very vintage gun. It was used a lot in the early world wars. It's kind of a showpiece these days. There's a lot better handguns out there now, but it is a showpiece. This one, though, is next level. It's got these crazy pearl handles. There's like this gold leaf on it. It's all etched out. It has a bunch of Spanish writing on it.
Okay.
It is a straight showpiece. And the DEA agent that I'm with sees, and I look at him like, "Oh, look, this is kind of cool." And he sees it, and he's like, "Holy shit, hang on, I got to make a couple calls."
Okay.
So obviously we take the gun out of the diaper bag. We don't leave it.
Yeah.
Sophia, the nanny, the kid all leave. About 30, 45 minutes later, 2 federal agents, I don't know what agency they're with, they show up. They have some pictures, and they're comparing these pictures to the gun. And boom, they take the gun and they leave. And
That gun is responsible for something.
I never see it again. And then about 2 years later, I get a call, and they're explaining, hey, they confirmed it. Chapo Guzman actually had these custom 1911s made. And for different people in their organization, they called them lieutenants, like just kind of
a ranking.
A ranking, if you will. He had, I don't remember how many, X number of lieutenants. And he made these special 1911s for the lieutenants of his organization. And that's where the DEA guy was freaking out. He said, "I think that's one of the lieutenant guns." And there was only a handful of them that were made.
Here's your employee management tool.
Yeah, right. But that was a really big deal because that was confirmation that, okay, we have the right people. This is the real deal. So Penelope went home, and I closed the case, and that was that. Case closed.
There does have to be some gratification in the idea of being able to tell that story many, many years later. Because I've got to be honest, whenever we have discussed this, it's always been in very hushed tones.
Yeah, I've never been comfortable talking about this case just because I still believe there's potential threat to a handful of the people involved. I would love to make a movie out of this case. I think it is just ripe for a really good movie script.
I think our processes right now are very ripe for some movie scripts.
Yeah, and I don't want to hint to too much, but stick around, Socialites. Maybe one day this will be a movie that you get to watch.
Or some other cases that we're working on.
Yeah.
But again, I am totally okay traveling to Germany and doing other things around Europe if you're still uncomfortable going to Mexico.
Really, really nice of you.
Yeah. Join us next week, Socialites, for Mr. Chicken Fucker. Have a great week and stay safe.
We end up gassing the whole neighborhood. We have put so much gas in this house at this point that it looks like a Cheech and Chong movie, just smoke billowing out. It's going to keep getting crazy. Mr. Chicken Fucker continues for about 2.5 hours.
Oh my God.
He won't give much up, but he demands, he will not even respond anymore unless you call him Chicken Fucker. There's times where the skipper would go back and be like, "Hey, Steve, let's just talk, Steve." And just total silence. We're going to gas this guy.